Hey guys, this is Kelly from 12 Acres Farm. On today's video, I'll be sharing with you my 7 tips to help you in your garden to make gardening easier and hopefully cheaper too. Before we get started, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure that you give it a like, share it around and subscribe, as that's going to help my channel out a lot. And I really want to try and encourage people to start their own gardens and to share just how easy it is to grow your own food. But without further ado, let's get started with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is installing an irrigation system. Now, we have a drip irrigation system in our garden, which I installed last year, but before we had the irrigation system, I was going around and watering the gardens by hand. Now, this wasn't too bad when we had a smaller garden, but once I expanded the garden, it really was taking me far too long each morning and evening to come and water the garden, especially in the heat of summer when we were getting those 40 degrees Celsius plus days. After a bit of trial and error, I decided to set up a drip irrigation system. I didn't really know what I was doing, and looking on YouTube here, I found it difficult to find much information, especially for Australian-based gardeners. So I just taught myself as I went along. I decided to use a drip hose that already had the drippers pre-installed every 30 centimeters. This made it a lot easier as I was dealing with such a large space, so I wouldn't have to worry about installing those drippers myself. At the end of the garden beds, I have a valve at the end of each irrigation line where it connects to the main pipe. And I put this in here so I had the option of switching off that particular line of irrigation if I need to, depending on which vegetables I'm growing in the garden bed. I use black poly pipe to connect the irrigation throughout the garden and to the tap. I've got the poly pipe covered with wood chip mulch, just so it doesn't become a trip hazard, but also to protect it from the sun as well, so it doesn't degrade as fast because it is covered and protected by the mulch. Now, one of my main components of my irrigation system is my timer. Although a timer isn't necessary to have on your irrigation system, in my opinion, I definitely think it is something that is worth having, because having your garden watering system automated means that if you have to go away unexpected for a few days, or if you want to go away for a holiday, you can rest assured that when you come back, your garden's not going to be dead because it hasn't been watered. So although you do have to have that initial outlay of cost and the effort of installing it as well, in my book, having an irrigation system with a timer definitely is one of the best things that you can do in your garden to make gardening easier. Tip number 2 is growing your plants vertically. Now, I absolutely love growing my plants vertically, and I try and do it as much as I can in the garden. It not only looks amazing, but it also has many benefits as well, with the first one being that it saves space, which is fantastic, especially if you are growing in an area that is limited in size. When you're growing your plants up, you will also be able to plant more plants in a smaller space, which hopefully might mean that you can also get a bigger harvest of fruits and veggies too. Another benefit of growing your plants up is that it is actually healthier for the plants. When you have plants growing along the ground, they are actually more prone to rot and disease. Now, this not only affects the leaves and the flowers, but it can also affect the fruits and the veggies as well, which is why it is so important to try and get them up off the ground. Growing vertically will also help you to make use of more spaces in your garden, such as fences, walls, or underneath a balcony. And just like I mentioned earlier, this can come in handy, especially if you're growing in a smaller space and you don't have many options. You will find another benefit of growing your plants vertically when it comes time to harvest. Often when you've got your plants running along the ground, the veggies or the fruits can be harder to spot, which means they may stay on the vine for too long, risking getting overripe and no longer being suitable to eat. But when you've got them growing vertically, it's a bit easier to see the fruits and the veggies growing, which means you can harvest them easier, and they just look so pretty as well. So what are some options for growing your plants vertically? Well, one of my favorite things to use in my garden are these panels, like what I've got growing these snow peas on. In Australia, these are called Rio mesh, but in America, they are called cattle panels. In this garden bed here, I've got the panels arched over to form an archway where we can walk underneath and the plants can grow over the top of us. They are really durable and they last me a really long time, so I'm glad that I've got them in the garden. However, the downside to these panels is that they aren't very budget friendly. Here where I am, one panel, which is about 6 meters by 2.4 meters, set me back about $120 per panel. So it is very pricey. However, they do tend to last years down the track. So it is a one-off expense compared to other trellising options. Another option for trellising is wooden stakes like this one that I've got right here. Now, this is a much cheaper option and they do work well. However, they're not as durable as the mesh that I just showed you. I've used these in the garden before and I found that they don't tend to last me more than a season or two before the wood starts rotting in the ground or snapping. Now, they are a more budget-friendly option though, with a pack of 6 costing me between $22 to $25, and they're very easy to find as well. Tip number 3 is to start and save your own seeds. Now, this one might not make gardening easier, but it definitely does make it cheaper. Have you seen how expensive seedlings at the store are lately? Now, this has quite a few benefits to starting your own seeds. And one of those is that you can end up with healthier plants. In my experience, when I buy seedlings from the store, they are often weaker and don't do as well in my garden, not to mention how much extra they have cost me as well. Starting your own seeds in your garden can also mean that you get a head start on the growing season. So this is especially important for those of you who have a shorter, warmer season. You can still start your seedlings and get that harvest even though you've got a shorter growing window. Another reason why I prefer to start my own seeds is because I have control over the whole growing process. I know exactly what soil has been used to start those seeds, and I know what has or hasn't been sprayed on the seedlings too. But one of my absolute favorite reasons why I like to start my own seeds is because of the variety available to you when you are growing from seed. When I last looked in the nursery, I don't think I saw more than 10 different varieties of tomato. Plus, did you know that there are over 10,000 varieties of tomato plants? How cool is that? Lastly, when you grow your plants from seed, you should also try and save the seeds from that plant as well. Not only does this save you even more money, but you get to witness the whole plant's life cycle from start to end, which is pretty amazing in itself. Now, however, please be aware that if you want to start saving your seeds, you should look into growing heirloom varieties of plants. Heirloom seeds are seeds that are over 50 years old and have been passed down by gardeners and seed savers. Yes, that's a real thing. Heirloom seeds are open pollinated, which means that they are pollinated either by the wind, the birds, the bees, or other insects. When you save an heirloom seed, the plant that you grow from that seed will also be just like the parent plant, which is the plant that you saved the original seed from. If you're planting a hybrid seed, then the next plant that you grow, if you save the seeds, the plant may not end up like that original parent plant. A hybrid plant often has 2 or more plants that the characteristics have been taken from. So any seeds that you save and future plants that you may grow from a hybrid seed, that plant may only take on one of the characteristics of the original plant, which obviously isn't great if you're growing a plant for, say, its delicious taste and its disease resistance. One more cool fact about heirloom seeds is that when you grow them in your garden and then save the seeds and then plant those seeds again in your garden, those new plants will be more adapted to your environment and climate. How cool is that? Tip number 4 is use shade cloth. Now, although this may not seem like a must to have in your garden, if you live in an area with really hot summers like me, then you may need to utilize shade cloth in your garden. Last summer, we had multiple days in a row of 40 degrees Celsius plus temperatures, and the whole garden was really suffering. We actually had to cover all of our tomato plants as they were wilting so bad and the fruit was starting to get sun scald from being exposed to the sun. Now, although these high temperatures may not kill off the tomato plant, when temperatures reach above 32 degrees Celsius, the tomato plants will actually face severe stress, which means they won't set any new fruit and the flowers that are currently on the plant may not pollinate. On very hot days, though, direct sunlight can cause sun scald on certain fruits like tomatoes, capsicums, and cucumbers. However, this can be prevented with shade cloth. I'm actually in an area in my garden at the moment where I've got some shade cloth above me here. We did install it last summer and we decided to keep it up as a permanent structure. It's kept the frost off some of our plants that we've got in here, and I will be growing tomatoes in here again this spring, which will be great, especially if we have another hot summer. Shade cloth can come in various percentages with how much sunlight they actually block out, ranging from 30% all the way up to 90%. Now, what you need in your garden really depends on your climate and what you've got growing in your garden. So before you buy a shade cloth, consult someone at the gardening store and do a little bit of research for your climate to see what you need. Another way that we've utilized shade cloth in our veggie garden is by covering a greenhouse frame with the shade cloth and turning it into a shade house. Now, I actually have two of these size greenhouses. One I have put the plastic back on, and this one I've left as a shade house. It was really easy to do, and I've just attached the shade cloth onto the frame with some cable ties. However, you can use some clips as well to pop that on, which can be used each season, so you're not having to buy new cable ties. This has been really handy, especially for having young plants in here, or if I'm taking cuttings, I will store them in here and it gets them out of the direct sunlight, which helps them to establish and not suffer from the heat stress. Tip number 5 on our list is healthy soils. Now, healthy soils really are the key to healthy plants and to get a bigger harvest of your fruits and veggies. If you're starting a vegetable garden, or any garden for that matter, you really do need to start with the health of the soil. Did you know that our soil is a living, breathing organism? That means that we should be feeding our soil just like we feed our own bodies. But unfortunately, with the heavy use of toxic herbicides, pesticides, and synthetic fertilizers, the health of our soil has dropped dramatically. These poisons kill the organisms, the bacteria and the fungi that are the life of our soils. So you may be wondering, what can we as home gardeners do to help restore the health of our soils? And the first thing that I always recommend when building up the health of our soil is to keep the soil covered with mulch. Bare soil can be eroded easily, which means the nutrients in the soil can be stripped out. But I will dive into the benefits of mulch a little bit later in the video. Another way of increasing the health of your soils can be through adding organic matter into your soil. This organic matter can be in the form of food scraps, earthworms, aged animal manure, or plant debris such as shredded leaves. This organic matter will help to build up the structure of the soil and add in those incredibly important nutrients that the plants need. The organisms in the soil will feed on that organic matter, which lightens the soil, helps to improve drainage, and will help the root growth of the plants. In the past, we had a raised garden bed where we would bury all kinds of things, whether it was food scraps or animals that had died or eggshells, whatever it was, we would bury in that raised garden bed. Well, it wasn't too long and we really noticed a change in the soil's health. Those plants that we had in that raised bed were the healthiest and happiest plants that we had in our entire garden. You can also add compost into your garden beds, which brings us to number 6 on our list. Number 6 on our garden tip list is to start your own compost. Compost really is the key to healthy soil, a healthy garden, and healthy plants. The microorganisms will feed on the soil, which in turn will improve drainage, add nutrients to the soil, and will build up the soil structure. There are many ways to start your own compost, and it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. You can buy compost bins or compost tumblers from your local hardware store or gardener store. However, you can just make your own system at home, like the system behind me here. Pete actually made this quite a few years ago just by using some old metal sheets that we had laying around, some star posts, and a few old pallets. Now, the pallets are starting to rot down a little bit, but that's to be expected. This is a few years old, but they shouldn't be too hard to replace. We can just simply pull those pallets off and pop some new ones there. Now, the compost bay behind me is a 3-bay system. We've got 2 bays here and a 3rd bay over to my left. It is really simple to start. If you don't have these materials, you can even simply just start building a pile in the corner of your garden. However, there are a few main materials that you will need to get your compost started. The first is nitrogen-rich materials, or also known as green materials. Now, these are things such as lawn clippings, fresh plant debris, or kitchen scraps. The other important addition that you're going to need for your compost is carbon-rich materials. And these are things such as straw, dried plant debris, wood chips, or leaves. However, you should try and have a higher ratio of the carbon-rich materials in your compost to avoid your compost becoming too wet, smelly, and soggy. It is important to keep your compost pile nice and moist and make sure that you are turning it on a regular basis. This will help with a bit of aeration in the compost to break down the materials even faster. Once your compost is broken down, you're ready to add it into your gardens and help to build up your soil. Number 7 on our garden tip list is mulch. Now, there are 2 types of mulch that you can add into your vegetable garden. You've got organic mulches and inorganic mulches. Now, inorganic mulches, such as pebbles and gravel, don't really add a lot of life into the soil. They're mainly for show. So today we're going to focus on the organic mulches, such as wood chip, sawdust, leaves, and straw. Keeping your soil covered with mulch will help stop the soil from drying out and will encourage microorganisms and bacteria to multiply and thrive in your soil. And although you do need to put in the initial efforts of laying the mulch down, and you will need to top it up every so often, you will start seeing the benefits of having mulch in your garden very soon. Keeping your garden's mulch will not only help to keep the weeds at bay, but it will also help to build up the life of the soil, giving you healthier, happier plants. Now, how often do you need to reapply your mulch really depends on what kind of mulch you're using in your garden. In our pathways, I prefer to use wood chip mulch as it is quite chunky and it's not really suitable to have around seedlings. I do like having the wood chip mulch in the paths though, as when we get heavy rain, it really stops the pathways from becoming muddy and big pools of water, and it helps to slow down the absorption of the water into the garden beds on either side. In our garden beds, I do prefer to use organic sugarcane mulch because it is so light and fluffy, making it really easy to put around plants, especially little seedlings. And if you have seeds planted in your gardens, the sugarcane mulch is so light that these seedlings can easily pop up through the mulch without too much trouble. The only downside to using sugarcane mulch for me is the price. A bag like this can easily set me back about $20, and when you have a large garden space to cover, the price can really add up. However, if you happen to live in an area where you have some farmers that do grow sugarcane, I would definitely look into approaching them and ask if they're happy to sell you some. That may be a cheaper way of getting some sugarcane mulch in your gardens. Now, if you live in an area where that isn't really possible, don't worry. There is a free alternative to mulching your gardens, and that is leaves, just like what's in the garden bed behind me. Around our garden, we do have some deciduous trees, which they have dropped their leaves around our garden. So about a month or 2 ago, I did go around and rake them up and pop them in a couple of the garden beds that were bare and didn't have any covering on the soil. I didn't have any sugarcane mulch at the time, but I had leaves, and they are a free mulch. So I thought, why not? So far, I'm really happy with how the gardens are looking with the leaves. And next year, I'm going to see if I can source even more leaves so I can get mulch for free. When I move the leaves, I can see that the soil is nice and moist underneath. It's not dry, but it's also not too wet, which you don't want that either. You just want a nice, happy medium. And it's looking really good. So gardening doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. There are cheaper alternatives to gardening, such as using leaves or getting free soil by starting your own compost. Bonus tip number 8 is to have patience. Learning to grow your own healthy, organic food really is a wonderful learning experience. And I truly believe that it's a skill that everybody should know how to do, especially with the current state of the world today. But sadly, in today's fast-paced world, we often expect results instantly, becoming frustrated whenever we have to wait for something. But when you first plant those tiny seeds into the ground, there is no shortcut or fast forward button. There is no instant gratification. You need to wait for those tiny little seeds to germinate into seedlings, and then you need to nurture them and care for them as they grow into mature plants. Did you know that being in the garden with plants can help to stimulate feelings of calm and relaxation, also helping your mental and physical health? I guess that is why so many people say that gardening is therapeutic to them. But sometimes things don't go to plan in the garden. Plants get disease, bugs take over, or an unforeseen weather event might wipe out your whole crop that you worked so hard to plant. And I know it can be disappointing, but there is a silver lining in all of this. When you're gardening, you can learn from the experiences, both good and bad. So don't be disheartened if things don't work out straight away. Pick up the pieces and try again. And hopefully over time, you will learn to love and enjoy gardening as much as I do, because I really believe that it is something special. Well, that's all for today, guys. I really hope that this video was helpful for you and that hopefully you can use some of the tips that I shared in your own garden. If you have any questions at all, please make sure that you pop them below in the comments. And if you have any tips that you'd like to share, make sure you write them as well, as I'd love to check them out. If you did enjoy today's video, please make sure that you give it a like, share it around and subscribe, as that's going to help my channel out a lot. But in the meantime, I hope you can get into your gardens to plant some seeds, plant some plants, grow some food, and try and be a bit more self-sufficient. But until then, I'll see you all next time. Bye.